Hey kids. Okay, this is the third time I'm making this video. 2 times something has happened that has stopped my video from proceeding. I'll start where I left off last chapter there, in chapter 9. It was narrower at the bottom than it was at the top, and from it pointed a long, narrow finger of stone. "Look for the hand that points the way," read the map. Torch held high, they walked forward and through the archway deeper into the mountain. Chapter 10, The Endless Night. Or actually, just Endless Night, not the... It was dark. So dark and so very cold. Marley held up the torch and Rowan drew a breath in amazement. Countless rainbow-colored spears of stone hung glistening from the soaring roof of the chamber. Strange, squat shapes rose from its floor in groups and in lines, and the cave was huge. He could not see its ending. John took a step forward, glanced at his compass, and then he hesitated. "The needle is wavering," he said. "Something's interfering with its workings." "Metal in the rock, perhaps," suggested Marley. The torchlight flickered yellow on her face. She fidgeted, moving from foot to foot. "Perhaps. In any case, it would be foolish to rely on it completely, but without it, how can we find the path we are to take? We could so easily become lost in this maze." "And take the path where children play," said Rowan. "That's what the map told us." "Well, it would be a brave child who would venture here," Alan observed. Rowan peered around him, standing on his toes, craning his neck until he saw what he had been searching for. "I think, perhaps," he began, and then he faltered. Perhaps he was being foolish. He didn't want to lead them astray or to be laughed at. "Speak up, Rowan," urged Strong John. "This is not a time for anyone who has any plan at all to hold his tongue." It may be the stones," Rowan stammered, and he pointed. "Those stones are smaller than the others over here, and there's a space between them like a path, and their shapes, of course." Alan took the torch from Marley and led him to the spot, and sure enough, 2 lines of strange stones, bent and knobbly like children tumbling and crawling, climbed off into the darkness, and between them wound a clear, sandy path. "So, our way is marked for us," said John with satisfaction, putting away his compass. "And now we look for the face that breathes with sighs and has gleaming eyes." Alan laughed. "That should be interesting." He led them up the path, and the torch lighting the way in front of them, and looking back, Rowan saw the cavern receding into the darkness. Endless night. And he shivered. They moved on, and upward, always upward. They were climbing through the center of the mountain. Rowan tried not to think of the tons of rock and earth that surrounded them, pressing down, cutting off the light and the air. If they were lost here, no one would ever find them. They would wander in the endless night until they died, and the mountain would be their tomb. He pushed that fear down, but it grew, and it pressed on his belly and in his heart, making it hard to breathe. Higher and higher they climbed, through one chamber to the next, and by their sides the rocky children bent and stretched in a game that had no ending. The climbers said little, for the way was steep, and the silence was as thick around them as darkness. And Rowan listened to the hissing of the torch and to his own breath, and to Marley's panting behind him, and to the sound of John's boots crushing sand and hitting the rock in front of him. "Another cavern!" Alan's voice bounced back to them from walls that they could not see. They heard him scramble forward, and the torchlight disappeared. "The face!" he exclaimed. "The face is—" And then his voice trailed off. "Alan, what is it?" shouted Marley, pushing forward. "Alan, answer! Alan, bring back the light! We cannot see!" "The face," he called. His voice sounded strange, as though he were choking. "It is here. Come." But slowly. The torchlight reappeared, and cautiously they climbed toward it. Alan was standing by a wide gap in the rock, and he did not smile as they reached his side, but thrust the torch through the gap. "See for yourselves, but take care." They squeezed through the opening and into the cave beyond, and rods of white and yellow stone hung thickly from the roof. But the black and shining floor below them, below the ledge on which they stood, was as smooth as glass. Facing them on the far side was a wall of rock, a wall with a bulging lump in the middle, a lump that was shaped like a face looking down. They saw the twisted rocky nose, the swollen cheeks, the slitted mouth, the broad chin, and the gleaming eyes that cast beams of light across the floor. "Your way is marked by lines of light." That's what the map had said. There was a sound here, too, a sighing, a whistling, a breathy sound. It breathes, whispered Marley. The face that breathes, as the rhyme foretold. A passage on that side must open to the air, exclaimed John. That is the outside air we hear. Marley, we have climbed far in these caverns. We must surely almost be at our journey's end. I fear, said Alan, still in that strange voice, that I, at least, am at my journey's end now. And he's standing with his back pressed against the cavern wall, and as they stared at him, he slid down until he was sitting on the ground. Alan, get up, Marley ordered. What game are you playing? I would not have come here had I known. But how could I have known? He said wearily. Who would have ever dreamed it possible? And he rubbed his eyes, shaking his head. Alan, we do not know what you mean. Come on, we must move. Strong John frowned and turned away, and as he did so, his boot kicked a pebble from the ledge, and it fell to the shiny black floor. There was a splash, and the pebble disappeared. Ripples spread in silence, ever-increasing circles across the smooth surface on which they had all mistaken for solid ground. Water, said Alan. He looked haggard. That means kind of like worn out and frayed. The cave is half full of water, deep water, for it's black and cold and you cannot see the bottom. So, Marley demanded, so we put up with the cold and we swim. Alan raised his eyebrows. But you see, Marley, my dear, I cannot swim. What? They gaped at him and he stared back defiantly. It's not a skill the travelers teach their young, he said. The travelers sensibly leave swimming to the Maras folk. After all, they're the ones who get their living from the sea and have webbed feet and hands to make the whole miserable business more efficient. The travelers refuse to have anything to do with water in quantities larger than a tin tub. But we in Wren all learn how to swim, Rowan burst out. We have to, as soon as we can walk practically. We go down to the coast or the river on the plain, especially to learn. He winced, remembering those lessons in the river. He had learned how to swim in the end, but he had not enjoyed it. Alan smiled bitterly. Yes, in Wren it's different. In Wren you must have every physical skill, of course, even if you are regarded as useless. Even if you live far inland, even if you have to travel a day and a night just to practice swimming, or you may never swim from one year to the next, or never again in your life, still you will be able to swim. And you must be able to climb and fight and to run and so on and so on. Such things in Wren are thought so important. They are important, cried Marley. A person must be prepared for whatever adventure he or she might meet. As we can see right now, Alan, and she faced him despairingly. So you did not learn to swim as a small child. That's unfortunate, but why on earth have you not learned once you arrived in Wren? Alan glared at her. Was I not already a figure of fun and ridicule? Ridicule means they were making fun of him and teasing him and bullying him. I was the strange-looking, skinny traveler boy who had never worn shoes and knew nothing of your village ways. At 10 years old, the taunts of other children are very hard to bear. Rowan will tell you that, and he glanced at Rowan, who nodded silently. So, he had been right. Alan had understood how he felt. Marley took Alan's arm. I understand, Alan. But you could have asked for swimming lessons, and he rounded on her. No, you do not understand. Was I to even make more of a clown of myself by letting those bullies under the teaching tree know of my weakness? I could not teach myself in secret. There is no water in Wren but the stream and the bookshop pool, and I would have asked to have been taken to the river for playing lessons with the 3-year-olds. How Ellis would have loved that. He shrugged and twisted his face into a comical mask. As you can imagine, the longer I waited, the more impossible it became, he said. And before I knew it, it was unthinkable. An adult of Wren who could not swim, he smiled. It did not matter, of course, he went on softly. It did not matter one jot, until now. Strong John shook his head. But there must be a way. If you just... John, you must accept this. As I have. I cannot swim, not a stroke, said Alan firmly. So if you are thinking of helping this lame duck along, pulling him by one useless wing, perhaps think again. The water is icy, and you will have trouble enough keeping yourselves afloat without attempting to stop me from drowning. The ropes will not stretch to the other side, so put that out of your mind as well. This is why you never take a chance to visit the coast on market days, Alan, John said, looking thoughtfully. I've often wondered, Well, now your wonderings are at an end, Alan smiled, and he turned his head. Marley bit her lip. You cannot return to Wren alone now, Alan, she burst out at last. The swamp will surely be your death without a partner. I have thought of this. And he brushed his coat as though removing the dried mud that was clinging there was all that was important to him. I will make camp beside the cave mouth, and I will wait for you there. He laughed bitterly. I had thought to be a hero of Wren, and show them what a half-traveler could do. Who would have thought that such a small weakness would be my undoing, and that because of my foolish pride I would let down my friends? He looked at Strong John, or he did not look at Strong John. I would give much not to be so. Please forgive me. 7 hearts the journeys make, 7 ways the hearts will break, Rowan remembered. But John put out his hand. There's nothing to forgive, old friend. Wait for our return. Make more torches if you can find good wood. We will need them. He hesitated, and then he went on with a lower voice. He turned his head away from Rowan, but Rowan still heard what he said. If we do not return in 3 days, Alan, you must wait no longer. You must find your way back to Wren somehow, to those who love us. Better that they hear the worst than they not hear at all. Is this agreed? It's agreed. Alan took John's hand and he squeezed it warmly. Let us go, said Marley. Her eyes were full of tears and she threw her arms around Alan. We will be back, she whispered. Take care. And you, Marley. And John and Rowan and Marley stripped off their boots and their outer clothes and stuffed them into their packs, and then, shivering, they entered the water and began swimming. It was indeed bitterly cold, so cold that Rowan's flesh first stung and then it grew numb. The water flooded his mouth, harsh and sour. Across the black pool they crept, sliding like crabs along the lines of light, sticking out with their right hands and holding their packs with the left so that they dragged behind them, half in and half out. Nameless things brushed Rowan's feet and legs as he swam, and he clenched his teeth at the thought of them, but he kept pulling along as his arm grew heavier and heavier and slower with every stroke. Soon he was in agony, but worse of the pain was the thought of sinking down into this black, still hole, never to see the light and air again. And then his hand struck rock, and with a wave of relief he realized that he could stand, and he looked up, and the huge stone face was above him, and Marley was already climbing out of the pool, gasping and dripping, and behind him Strong John heaved his pack out of the water too, as he reached the shore. All of them turned and called to Alan, who was waiting anxiously on the other side. They were standing in the shadows, so he could not see them, but he lifted his torch high in response to their shouts. At least he knew they were safe. Marley bent down and offered a hand to help haul Rowan up beside her. His teeth were chattering so much that he couldn't speak. He jumped up and down to warm himself, and with cold, clumsy fingers, Marley unbuckled his pack and pulled out the clothes he had stripped off before the swim. Take off your wet things and put these on before you freeze to death, she advised. They are a little damp, but much better than nothing. Rowan knew he could never do that, not in front of Marley. He couldn't even undress in front of his mother anymore. He hesitated. By my life, Rowan, Marley exclaimed in amused exasperation, her own clothes clutched in her arms. You have been menaced by giant spiders, nearly smothered in a swamp, and now half drowned and frozen, and you are embarrassed about taking your clothes off in front of me? Doesn't that seem ridiculous? Not at all. Strong John was grinning as he came up behind them. I understand completely. Some things a man simply cannot do. I suggest you turn your back, Marley. Then modesty can be preserved, and we can all get on and get warm without delay. Chapter 11, The Snare. Now, having read this book, I think the snare is gnarly. That's all I'm going to say. You're going to have to listen to what it is when I read the next chapter. All right, I hope you're well. Take care of each other.